Hey everyone and welcome back. Now some of the next few videos will be dedicating it for troubleshooting the IAM policies. Now we have been learning various aspects related to IAM and it is important for us to understand the troubleshooting aspect of IAM policies because this is important for exams. So the purpose of this video is to take a list of IAM policies and troubleshoot them to understand why they do not work. Now for our demo purposes, we'll take example of 5 policies which does not work as intended. Now I'm in my Atom editor here and I have a file called as troubleshoot.json. Now this file basically has 5 distinct policies. So you have policy 3 here, you have policy 4 and you have policy 5. Now each of this policy basically will teach you a different thing about IAM. So it is important for us to understand more about why these policies do not work. So what we'll do is we'll conclude the video now. I'll be pasting these policies after the video so that you can go ahead and try each of these policies within your IAM policy editor and figure out why it would not work. Now do not worry if you do not get all of these 5 policies to be working. There are some policies which are little tricky. So let's do one thing. Let's conclude this video and after I share this document, we'll have another session where we go ahead and we look into the solution associated with each of these IAM policies. Hey everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video, we'll go ahead and look into the solutions associated with the policies that we had shared during the troubleshooting session. Now let's look into the policy 1 over here. Now before we go ahead and troubleshoot, let's copy this policy and within the IAM console, let's click on new inline policy and within the JSON, we'll go ahead and paste the policy here. So let me also maximize the screen so it becomes easier for us to understand what is happening here. Now this is a very simple policy which basically allows action of star on resource of example bucket and you have one more resource of example bucket / star. Now when you do a review policy, it says that this policy contains the following JSON error, could not format the policy. Now generally, whenever you are troubleshooting the IAM policy, first thing verify whether the JSON is correct. Now within Google, you can do JSON validator. Let's open up the validator here. So this is quite famous. Let's copy this policy. Let's paste it here and let's validate the JSON. Now here it clearly says that syntax error, duplicate key, resource on line 6. Alright, so this gives you much more better information than what you would see within the IAM console over here. Now what is happening over here is that you have a key of resource and you have a value associated with it. Now again you are defining the same key and you are adding one more value associated with it. So it is saying that you have a duplicate key. So you have to make sure that while you are writing the policy, make sure that the keys are not duplicate. So now what you can do is you can remove this duplicate key, which is resource in this case. All right. And now you have 2 resources which are available over here. But even if you go ahead and validate here, it gives you an error. Now, whenever you have multiple actions, you can put it in an array. So let's add an array here. And as soon as you do a validate, it says valid JSON. Now, a simple example of array, let me quickly show you. So let's consider that I have this one pen. Now I can hold this pen perfectly well, but when I have 20 or 30 pens over here, what I do, I put it in a box. All right, I put everything in a pencil box here. Similarly, you can consider that whenever you have more than one resource or more than one action, you can put it in a placeholder or a box. So this is what array refers to. Alright, so this is a very simplistic explanation. So simple thing to remember, whenever you have multiple definitions that you want to put, always add it within an array. So let's copy this up, and within the IAM policy, I'll put this statement. Let's do a review, and you see it works perfectly well. Now let's go back. Now one of the things that also some of the individuals might quickly detect, although that is not true, is that the version element is missing over here. Now one important part to remember is that even though you have not specified version element, as we have already discussed, your IAM policy will default to the version of 2008. So it is perfectly well that you do not specify version element with respect to your policy not failing. Alright, so I hope you understood the solution associated with the first policy. So there were few issues. First is that there was a duplicate key. Second was that we had to put these items within an array. And third important learning that we experienced, that always validate the JSON policy with an external JSON validator as well, because that will give you a much more clear error log into what is the issue associated with the policy. So with this, we'll conclude this video. I hope this video has been informative for you, and I look forward to see you in the next video. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now in the previous video, we looked into the troubleshooting solution associated with the policy 1. Now in today's video, we'll dedicate it with the policy 2 over here. Alright, so let's do one thing. Let's copy this policy, and within the IAM console, let's go ahead and paste it over here. Now once I do that, let's click on review, and now you see it is not giving us any error. Now one of the things that might be expected was that the policy will give an error and then only it will be considered as not working. However, that is not the case. Let's look into the example. So let's call it as policy 02, and let's create a policy. Now, one important part to remember is that although the policy was successful, so the reason why policy was successful primarily because your JSON was perfectly well. However, this does not really mean that the things that you have defined within the policy will work as intended. Now within this policy, under the action, you see that you have an access key. That basically means that there is an effect of allow of working with the operations related to access key, like creation of access key, deletion of access key, and so on. And you have a resource which is defined over here. Now let's do one thing. Let's go to the IAM section from the Alice user so that we can understand on what is happening. Now within here, since Alice user does not really have any permission other than the access secret key, you will get a lot of errors over here. Now one quick way in which you can quickly go to the Alice user is to copy the path. So if you look into the URL here, within the users, you have the Alice user which is present over here. So let's copy this URL and let me quickly paste it over here. And currently you are under the security credentials section of the Alice user. Now within the access keys over here, it says that you need permission and it is showing as access denied. However, within the policy, you have clearly allowed the user to have all the actions associated with the access key. Now, if you look into the resource section over here, within the resource section, you are making use of a policy variable. And this is the reason why you are getting an error over here. Now, if you would had to replace this specific policy variable with a static name of the IAM user, let's try this out. Now let's refresh this page, and now you see it is showing the active access key. You can go ahead and also create an access key over here. So the issue was related to policy variable. Now removing the policy variable and replacing it with a static is not the best of solution, because it might happen that it would be a managed policy which would be attached to multiple users. So we have to look into a better solution, and the better solution is to explicitly specify a version element here. If you do a version element on IAM, let's open up the documentation. You see that there are two versions which are available. One is 2012 and second is 2008. Now, as we even discussed earlier, because in the earlier policy as well, we had never explicitly defined a version element. Now, if you do not explicitly define a version element, it will go to 2008. Alright, so it will go to this 2008 version, and this specific version does not support policy variable. So in order for you to make use of policy variable, you will have to explicitly make use of the 2012 version element. So let's copy this up and let's go to edit policy, and this time we'll specify a version element here. Now, along with that, let's replace this with a policy variable. So we'll undo the change that we had done. Let's click on review and we'll save the change. So now we have a policy variable and we have explicitly defined a version element to be 2012 where the policy variable is supported. So to quickly verify if things are working, let's quickly refresh the page, and as expected, you are able to see the key. Let's make it inactive to verify if things are working. You see things are working. You can even go ahead and delete the keys. Alright, so I hope you understood the solution associated with the policy 2. We learned few things. First is adding a policy without any error does not really mean that it works as intended. That was the first thing. Second thing was, if you do not add a version element, it will go to 2008. And 2008 does not support various things including policy variable. And third thing is how we can go ahead and explicitly define a version element to a existing policy. So that's about it for today's video. I hope this video has been informative for you, and I look forward to seeing the next video. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now in today's video, we'll look into the solution associated with the policy 3. Now, I would say that policy 3 is one of the most tricky policy among all of the 5 policy that we are discussing. So let's do one thing. Let's copy this policy up and first verify with the JSON validator if the JSON itself is correct. Now it says valid JSON. Now, if you look into this policy, it is a very straightforward policy where you have an effect of allow, action of CloudFront, and you are specifying a resource where ARN is ARN AWS CloudFront : star. So you have specified a star over here. Now let's do one thing. Let's copy this up, and within the IAM console, let's create a new inline policy and I'll paste it here. Let me also maximize the screen. Now if I do a review policy over here, it clearly states that the following resources are invalid. They must either be star or an ARN pattern of ARN AWS CloudFront star. Now we are already doing this OR section over here. If you see, we are already doing this OR section in here. However, it is giving an error still. Now, the reason why you are getting this error is because of the unsupported action associated with the resource element. Now, this is one important part to remember. Although you might not really see such examples for exams, however, it is important for us to know this because you will encounter this issue specifically while you're working with production environments. Now, if you open up the documentation here, now associated with each action that you see over here, you also have a resource types. Now, within here, you see that there are no specific resource types which are configurable here. That basically means that you will have to make use of a star. So if I go ahead and make use of a star over here and do a review, it works perfectly well. Now, whenever you are working with the policies, let's take an example of an auto scaling policy here. So for the auto scaling policy, you see that for following actions, now it also depends upon the action. Now for the following 6 actions over here, the types of resource which are supported, it is blank. That means you will have to make use of asterisk, which is the wildcard over here. If you do not make use of a wildcard, your policy will not really work. Now, one important part to remember over here is that whenever you deal with some kind of a policy which does not really work, you can always look if there is a corresponding managed policy which is available. So let's do a cancel over here and let's look into the policies and let's see if AWS has provided any managed policy. And you see you have one policy which provides full access to CloudFront. This is very similar to the policy that we were discussing in terms of intent. Now, if you look into this policy, it has various other things like S3 and all, but this is not of our interest right now. However, if you look into the below section over here, you have a CloudFront star, and also within the resource, you have specified a star over here. All right. So for such cases, you should always verify within the documentation. I'll share you this link because this will prove to be quite important in the longer term. Again, for exams, you might not see, or I would say you will not see such type of questions, but it is important for you to understand this specific mapping on where a resource ARN is supported and where ARN is not supported, and only a wildcard like this is supported. So that's the overview about the third policy. I hope this video has been informative for you and I look forward to see you in the next video. Hey everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video we'll look into the solution associated with the policy 4. Now this is a very simple solution. So let's do one thing. As we know, for our methodology, we always verify the overall syntax of this JSON within the JSON validator. So let's copy this up. Let's validate the JSON, and you see it directly takes you to the line which has an error. Now the solution to this is very simple. Now if you look into the previous line of effect, so effect is a key over here. So for effect, you have specified allow, so this becomes a value, and after this specific value you have added a comma. Now similarly here for the action, which is the key, you have specified S3 star. However, you forgot to add a comma over here. Now as soon as you add a comma and if you do a validate JSON, you see your policy works pretty well. So that's the overview about the solution associated with the policy 4. Again, my main intention for the policy 4 was to make sure that you make use of a JSON validator to first verify the JSON before putting things within the IAM. So with this, we'll conclude this video. I hope this video has been informative for you and I look forward to seeing the next video. Hey everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video, we'll look into the solution associated with the policy 5. So let's do one thing. Let's copy up the entire policy and within the JSON validator, let's go ahead and paste it. Now here you see it basically outrightly gave you an error at this specific line. Now what is happening here is that there are two JSON policy objects which are defined over here. Now if you'll see, your JSON policy starts here and it ends here. Alright, so this is the JSON policy, and again you are starting a new one from here. So there are two JSON policy objects which are defined over here. So let's do one thing. There are multiple things that we need to understand. I'll copy this policy and within the IAM, let's go ahead and paste it over here. Now, the first thing, as we already know, that you have two JSON policy objects that you have defined over here. So for IAM, this multiple objects definition is not really supported. So let's do one thing. Let's go ahead and remove the second object over here. All right. Now, this is the first part. Now, the second part here is that IAM also does not support multiple statements. So what you can do is within the statement here, you see, you have a statement and you have the effect, action and resource which are defined over here. So you can add multiple such aspects. So you can put a comma and you can start your curly brace and you can copy the effect, action and resource very similar to the first statement. Let's indent it properly. All right. And let's remove the older statement that we have defined over here. Now what we have done, we have a single statement. Now within this statement, you have a effect, action and resource. So this is the first block. And in the second block also you have the effect, action and resource which is defined over here. Alright, and then you have the outer block which is associated with the start of the JSON object. So let's go ahead. Now let's quickly do a review policy, and you see it basically gave an error outrightly. Now the reason why it has given an error is because within the statement we have multiple blocks which are defined, and we have already discussed that when you have multiple things you should make use of a placeholder. So the placeholder is basically an array. So you can start an array, and after the second policy block, so array starts, you have the first policy block, you have the second policy block, and the array ends and your JSON object ends. Now let's do one thing, let's do a review policy, and you see it works perfectly well now. So two important learnings. First, always have one outer object within your JSON. Second is that you cannot have multiple statements within a single policy. And the third is always make use of an array whenever there are multiple things which are specified within your IAM policy. So that's the high level overview about the solution associated with the policy 5. So with this, we'll conclude this video. I hope this video has been informative for you, and I look forward to see you in the next video.